coming back to this because we just can't overstate how important and alarming it is. Donald Trump, at a rally in Ohio just last night, warned that there will no longer be elections if he loses in November. And he defended the January 6 rioters, calling them, quote, hostages. Mary McCord and Dave Aronberg are back with us.
Dave, I want to drill down on that. I think it's important and critically important for people to understand exactly when you have a former president referring to insurrectionists as hostages. What is your take here as someone who's worked with criminal defendants and have been on the side of making sure that, no one's above the law and that everyone is held accountable for their behavior? How do you assess this moment where you have a president saying the things that Donald Trump continues to say, not just about the election itself, but then furthering and amping up those charges, if you will, by talking about the very people who committed the crime that we saw in front of our own eyes, somehow the victim and somehow patriots and somehow they're the ones that we should be admiring and supporting?
Michael, it's horrifying to call these insurrectionists hostages. Some of these folks were domestic terrorists. They're insurrectionists. Some of them were convicted of seditious conspiracy. And to say that these traitors should be just pardoned because Trump is campaigning on that is appalling. And it really is something that needs to be discussed more. I think a lot of us are just whistling past the graveyard. We're ignoring this, or we're just chalking up to Trump being Trump. But can you imagine if Joe Biden campaigned on pardoning domestic terrorists? It would be like a quadruple Benghazi. You would not be able to hear the end of it. But with Trump, it's just Trump being Trump. But it should be discussed every day because this is the future of our democracy at stake.
I will also say, go ahead, Michael.
No, I was going to just want to push a little bit more on that. Prosecutors, people who are in the criminal justice system, how do you think they take that? And what do you think? Because I asked Director Brennan in our last hour how folks in the, DOD, NSA, CIA, FBI, and federal agencies, how they hear this. How do your fellow prosecutors and colleagues who are in law enforcement, who are trying to protect and defend against the very thing that Donald Trump is seemingly embracing?
Well, they're appalled by this rhetoric, but, Republicans have branded themselves the party of law enforcement back the blue. And for a lot of Americans, it doesn't resonate that you have the former president running again on a platform of pardoning these insurrectionists, people who attacked law enforcement. And if you do this, you are really undoing the rule of law, because as a prosecutor, it is demoralizing when you see, after all the work you do to actually convict someone of seditious conspiracy, which is not easy to do, then you have someone campaigning and say, we're going to undo it all. We're going to just pardon all these folks. It really is an affront to the memory of the law enforcement officers who died. And so I'm disgusted by it. And I wish more people were talking about it. So kudos to you for mentioning it, because it should never be forgotten as we go vote in November.
No Trump amnesia here. Mary McCord, those were not the only things that he said last night. Donald Trump, he attacked a number of these cases. He called New York AG Letitia James a, quote, real lowlife. He said that DA Bragg was put in his office to, quote, get Trump. He made fun of Fulton County DA Fani Willis's name, her relationship with Nathan Wade. But almost most notable to me, Mary, was he tried to brush all of these cases off as, quote, local cases. Right? Ignoring the fact that all of these cases have national import and national impact. These are not local cases. Yes, the venue might be Georgia, because what he did in Georgia was try to undermine a national election.
That's right. And even the New York case, right, involving the payments to Stormy Daniels, which was a type of election interference in the 2016 election to keep information that would have been damaging to him as a candidate, to keep that from the public. I mean, that has a national significance. He was a presidential candidate and did not want that information to come out. As you indicated, the Georgia case, it is a RICO case that is about the effort focused on the efforts in Georgia, but the effort to overturn the vote of the people in Georgia, which, of course, would have been very significant to the ultimate count, the ultimate electoral ballot count, which involved the entire election in 2020. So they're locally venued, like you said. 2 points, though, I think that to come back to the danger of these comments. Each thing that you just read, each criticism and attack on these prosecutors, we know what happens after these kind of attacks, right?
Yes.
There are
Yes.
threats. There might be threats not just over the phone or on the internet or on social media, but sometimes there are actually physical threats, people that do travel, that do try to harm these prosecutors, harm prosecutors in their offices. And this is dangerous. I mean, we have had multiple prosecutions now of people making threats against prosecutors and judges and others. The other point I want to make, just to go back to what we were talking about Trump's comments about so-called hostages, the defendants who've been convicted, and many of them are serving prison time for their role in the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. It's not just prosecutors who are disgusted. It's not just, others who are disgusted. Judges in the District of Columbia who've been overseeing these cases now ever since they started to be brought in 2021. Republican-appointed judges, Trump-appointed judges, Democrat-appointed judges, they have been united in how serious these crimes have been and how serious they must be taken. And they have also had numerous of them recently speaking out with alarm about this rhetoric about political prisoners and hostages. Judge Royce Lamberth, a Reagan appointee, Judge Thomas Hogan, a Reagan appointee, speaking out, saying this narrative, this false narrative about hostages, this is infecting, it's wrong. Number one, it's just false. And it's, getting embedded in our history in a way that's very damaging to democracy.